All right, let's dive right into this one. Today we're tackling the Satanic Bible, a text that sparked, more than its fair share of controversy and curiosity for sure. You specifically requested a deep dive on this one, so let's peel back the layers and see what LaVey was really getting at.
Yeah, it's definitely not your typical religious text.
That's putting it mildly. But before we get into the philosophy itself, I have to admit, I'm fascinated by Anton LaVey, the man behind it all. It's like something out of a movie, a kid steeped in occult tales, thanks to his Transylvanian Romani grandmother, who then grows up, to challenge the entire religious landscape.
He certainly didn't shy away from shaking things up.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that rebellious spirit woven throughout the Satanic Bible. What's interesting to me is how he positions Satanism
Right.
as a direct reaction to what he saw as hypocrisy within Christianity.
Right, like the whole do as I say, not as I do thing.
Exactly. Well, LaVey really honed in on that disconnect between people's professed beliefs and their actions. He saw it firsthand, playing organ for both carnivals and evangelists. Talk about a study in contrast.
Mm. Wow.
You can imagine the stories he must have witnessed, the kind of behavior that would make anyone question the whole idea of religious morality.
I mean, and it wasn't just the hypocrisy that bothered him, right? It was also this idea that Christianity and traditional religion in general was all about denying your natural instincts, suppressing your desires.
Absolutely. He saw that as fundamentally flawed. He believed it led to all sorts of psychological and even physical problems. LaVey's whole philosophy was about embracing the complete human being, mind, body, and soul, not just the spirit.
So when he talks about humanity, striving to burst the restrictive bonds of religion, he's not just talking about ditching church on Sunday, is he? He's talking about a complete paradigm shift, right?
He is. It's about questioning everything, challenging the very foundation of what you've been taught to believe. And for LaVey, that started with rejecting this idea of a universal, absolute moral code.
Okay, now we're getting into the good stuff. This whole concept of empirical morality. It's like he's saying morality is subjective, right? That there's no one-size-fits-all answer to the question of right and wrong.
Exactly. And he's not just pulling this out of thin air. He draws on philosophers like Pythagoras, Hegel, Spencer, and Comte, thinkers who also grappled with these questions of individual intellectual independence. It's about taking responsibility for defining your own moral compass based on your own experiences and reason. No blind faith, no dogma, just you, your intellect, and the world around you.
I mean, that's a pretty radical idea, isn't it? Yeah, hold society together if everyone's just making their own rules.
It's a question LaVey definitely wanted people to wrestle with, and it's one that gets to the heart of what Satanism is really all about. Is it a recipe for chaos, or their deeper, perhaps even more demanding level? A personal responsibility implied.
Well, I guess that's what we're here to figure out, right? Speaking of responsibility, LaVey himself had a pretty unique background, and you can see how it shaped his worldview.
Right, it's not just the Romani grandmother. You've got the mix of Georgian and Alsatian ancestry, the stints as a carnival worker, and a police photographer. It's almost like he was deliberately seeking out experiences that would challenge his perceptions, expose him to the rawness of life, both the beautiful and the ugly.
It's interesting because you see that reflected in the rituals he created for the Church of Satan. He wasn't interested in the whole Black Mass concept, this idea of mocking Christian rituals. He wanted to create something new, something positive, even celebratory.
And those rituals weren't just about having a good time, although there was definitely an element of that. They were designed to help people overcome their inhibitions, to break free from societal constraints, and to really connect with their deepest desires. Think of them as a form of psychodrama, a way to act out those desires in a safe and controlled environment.
Okay, so we've got this rejection of traditional morality, this embrace of the complete human being, this emphasis on ritual and self-expression. Where does the whole idea of God fit into all of this?
That's where a lot of people get tripped up. It's a common misconception that Satanists don't believe in God. But it's not that simple. They just have a very different understanding of what God represents.
So it's not about worshiping the devil with horns and a pitchfork.
Not at all. The Satanic Bible is surprisingly clear on that. For a Satanist, God is more of an impersonal force, a balancing factor in the universe, rather than a personal deity who judges and punishes.
That's an interesting perspective. So if God is this neutral force, what about the concepts of evil and sin? I mean, those are pretty central to most religions.
Right. But in Satanism, those concepts are viewed through a completely different lens. Instead of seeing sins as transgressions against a divine authority, They're seen as natural human inclinations, things like lust, greed, and pride. LaVey argues that these aren't inherently evil, they're just part of what makes us human. It's about being honest with yourself and taking responsibility for your actions, rather than trying to deny or suppress your natural desires.
Okay, so instead of feeling guilty about having those desires, you acknowledge them, accept them, and then what? Do you just let them run wild?
Well, that's where the idea of responsibility comes in. It's not about indulging in every whim without any regard for the consequences. It's about finding a balance between gratification and self-control. LaVey actually warns against letting your desires control you, becoming a slave to them.
So it's more nuanced than just do whatever feels good.
Much more nuanced.
Yeah.
It's about understanding your own nature, your own desires, and figuring out how to express them in a way that's both fulfilling and responsible.
I'm starting to see how this could be appealing, especially to someone who's felt stifled. By traditional religious dogma, it's like he's saying, hey, it's okay to be who you are, to embrace your desires, but don't let them control you. Take ownership of your choices.
Yeah, it's a really good way to put it. And that sense of ownership, of personal power, is really at the core of Satanism. And that idea of power leads us to one of the most misunderstood and often misrepresented aspects of Satanism magic.
Yeah, as soon as you mention satanic magic, people start picturing all sorts of dark rituals and demonic invocations. But I get the sense it's not quite as sensational as Hollywood would have us believe.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
LaVey was actually quite critical of those who practiced what he called stage magic. You know, all the theatrics and hocus pocus. For him, true satanic magic was much more grounded in psychology and the power of the will.
So it's not about summoning demons or casting spells like you see in the movies.
Not exactly. The Satanic Bible actually outlines 3 specific types of rituals: sex, compassion, and destruction. But the core principle behind all of them is the same. It's about focusing and directing your emotional energy, your will, to effect change in accordance with your desires.
I'm really curious about this. Let's take destruction magic as an example. What would that actually involve?
First, it's crucial to understand that LaVey was very clear on this point. True satanic magic never involves harming innocent beings. He specifically denounced the idea of animal, or God forbid, child sacrifice. Those are the kinds of things perpetuated by those who fear and misunderstand Satanism, not by those who practice it.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, destruction magic isn't about causing physical harm. It's more about what? Directing negative energy towards someone you consider an enemy.
Oh, even that needs some clarification. It's not about blindly lashing out or indulging in hatred for the sake of it. LaVey cautions against that kind of half-hearted hatred, saying it's ultimately harmful to your own emotional well-being.
So there's a strategy involved.
Absolutely. LaVey was very specific about this. He believed that destruction magic should only be used as a last resort, and only against those who have truly earned your wrath. He saw it as a way to confront and overcome negativity, rather than suppressing it or letting it fester.
That makes sense. I mean, we all encounter negative people in our lives, people who try to bring us down or manipulate us. It's like he's saying, don't let them win. Don't let them steal your power. Confront them. Banish them from your life.
And that confrontation doesn't necessarily have to be a physical or even a verbal one. It could be a purely mental exercise, a way of reclaiming your power and asserting your boundaries.
Okay, so how would this mental confrontation work? What would someone actually do during a destruction ritual?
It's all about imagery and focus. You would create a vivid representation of your enemy's downfall, imagining them suffering, failing, being brought low. It's almost like a very intense form of visualization, but with a specific intent behind it.
So it's not about wishing actual harm on someone. It's more about what? Severing ties, banishing their influence from your life.
Exactly. And LaVey stresses the importance of choosing your targets carefully. He says it's essential to be aware of your own limitations and to select targets who are most likely to be receptive to your influence.
So you have to know your audience, so to speak. It's fascinating how he blends psychology and ritual in this way. It's like he's saying that our minds are powerful tools and that we can use them to shape our reality.
And that's not just true for destruction magic. It applies to all 3 types of rituals outlined in the Satanic Bible.
So whether it's sex, compassion, or destruction, the key is in harnessing your emotional energy and directing it towards a specific goal.
Precisely. It's about aligning your will with your desires and using your imagination to create the reality you want.
I want to shift gears a bit and talk about another concept that's really intrigued me, the psychic vampire. I've always been fascinated by this idea. These people who seem to drain you of your energy, leaving you feeling exhausted and depleted.
It's a powerful metaphor, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of us have encountered these psychic vampires in our own lives. They're the manipulators, the guilt trippers,
Yeah.
the people who always seem to need something from you.
They're energy black holes.
Exactly. And LaVey doesn't just identify them. He also offers some practical advice on how to deal with them. He emphasizes the importance of setting boundaries and learning to say no. He actually suggests a pretty radical approach, almost like fighting fire with fire.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this.
But once you've figured out their game,
Mhm.
LaVey suggests you turn the tables on them, become unavailable, start making excuses, let them experience the frustration of not getting their needs met.
So you essentially force them to find another source of energy.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming your power and refusing to be a victim of their manipulation.
It's like saying, I'm not your emotional buffet anymore. Go find sustenance elsewhere.
That's a great way to put it.
I'm starting to see a pattern here, whether it's destruction magic or dealing with psychic vampires. It all comes back to this idea of personal power and taking control of your life.
You're absolutely right, and that's what LaVey saw as the ultimate goal of Satanism, to empower individuals to become masters of their own destiny.
It's interesting because he doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of human nature. In fact, he seems to embrace them, like this idea of indulgence versus compulsion, which we touched on earlier. He was a big believer in indulging your desires rather than letting them control you.
That's a really important distinction. Indulgence implies choice, agency, while compulsion is about being driven by forces beyond your control.
So it's not about denying your desires, it's about owning them, understanding them, and finding a healthy way to express them.
Exactly. And LaVey saw that as essential for both physical and mental well-being. He believed that repressing your natural instincts could actually lead to illness.
So basically, denying yourself pleasure can make you sick.
It can. And that's something that a lot of modern psychology actually supports. When we suppress our emotions, whether it's anger, sadness, or even joy, it can manifest in all sorts of unhealthy ways.
This is making me rethink the whole idea of sin. What if those so-called 7 deadly sins, lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, pride, what if they're not actually deadly at all? What if they're just natural human impulses that need to be understood and managed rather than demonized and suppressed?
That's a very satanic way of looking at it.
I guess it is. It's challenging, but I have to admit, there's something liberating about it. It's like he's giving us permission to be fully human, to embrace all aspects of ourselves, the light and the shadow.
And that's what makes the Satanic Bible such a powerful and thought-provoking text. It forces us to confront our own beliefs about good and evil, about the nature of humanity itself. It's not a book for everyone, but it's definitely worth exploring, even if it's just to challenge your own assumptions.
I completely agree. You know, we've talked a lot about rituals and the power of the mind, but I'm curious about the actual tools and symbols that LaVey used in his rituals. What was the significance of those?
He was very specific about this, and it all ties back to that idea of enhancing the emotional intensity of their ritual. Each element was carefully chosen for its symbolic meaning and its ability to evoke specific feelings and associations.
Give me some examples.
Okay. One of the key elements is the chalice, which represents ecstasy. And then there's the bell, used for purification, and to signal the beginning and end of the ritual. And then, of course, there's the sword, which symbolizes aggressive force, the will to power.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. It's all very theatrical, almost like a stage production.
It is. And that's intentional. LaVey understood the power of imagery and symbolism, and he used it to create a truly immersive experience.
And what about clothing? I remember reading something about how LaVey had very specific ideas about what to wear during a ritual.
Yes, he did. He saw clothing as another way to enhance the emotional intensity and focus of the ritual. For men, it was all about black robes, representing the powers of darkness.
And for women?
Well, the guidelines were a bit more suggestive, perhaps, reflecting the societal norms of the time. He encouraged women to wear clothing that was sexually suggestive, or, for older women, all black.
So it's about embracing sensuality, too.
Absolutely. LaVey saw sensuality as a powerful force that could be harnessed and directed towards magical ends.
It's all starting to make sense now. The rituals, the symbols, the clothing, it's all about creating a heightened state of awareness, a kind of trance-like focus that allows you to tap into your deepest desires and direct your will towards achieving them.
That's a great way to sum it up. It's about creating a psychological and emotional environment that's conducive to magical work.
Speaking of magic, I have to ask about this whole idea of the law of the trapezoid. What was LaVey getting at with that?
It's a fascinating concept, and it ties into what we were discussing earlier about imagery and its power to influence the subconscious mind. LaVey believed that the trapezoid shape held a special significance, that it had a subconscious impact on the human psyche.
Really? What was it about the trapezoid that he found so powerful?
He saw it as a symbol of power and stability. He felt that the trapezoid, with its strong base and converging lines, evokes feelings of strength, aspiration, and even a sense of mystery.
I've never really thought about shapes having that kind of power, but I guess it makes sense. I mean, we all know that certain colors can evoke specific emotions. Why wouldn't shapes have a similar effect?
It's something that architects and designers have known for centuries. Certain shapes create specific feelings and associations in the viewer's mind. And LaVey believed that understanding and utilizing these principles is essential for effective magic.
So how does the trapezoid factor into satanic rituals?
Well, for one thing, LaVey actually designed his own ritual chamber in the shape of a trapezoid. He called it an intellectual decompression chamber. And he believed that the shape itself contributed to the effectiveness of the rituals performed within it.
Interesting. So it's not just about the mental imagery and the emotional focus, but also about the physical environment in which the ritual takes place. It's all about creating this perfect storm of psychological and symbolic elements.
Exactly. And that brings us to another point that LaVey emphasized, the importance of timing. He believed that certain times of day were more effective than others for performing rituals.
Really? What time of day was he most fond of?
He was very specific about this. He believed that the most potent time to perform a ritual is in the early morning hours, just before the intended recipient of the ritual wakes up.
Why is that?
He believed that during those last few hours of sleep, a person is in a very receptive state. Their subconscious mind is most active, and they are more susceptible to suggestion.
So it's almost like you're tapping into their dreams, planting seeds in their subconscious.
Exactly. LaVey saw this time as the twilight period, between sleep and waking, and he believed it was the ideal time to influence someone's thoughts and desires.
That's a little creepy, but also kind of brilliant. It makes you wonder how much of our waking reality is shaped by these subconscious influences that we're not even aware of.
It's a question that LaVey definitely wanted people to ponder, and it's one that gets to the heart of what Satanism is really all about, understanding and harnessing the power of the mind.
You know, as we've been talking about this, I keep coming back to this idea that LaVey wasn't really interested in evil for evil's sake. It's like he was trying to reclaim the word Satan and use it to represent something else entirely.
I think you're right. He was rebelling against the traditional religious narrative that demonized certain human impulses and labeled them as sinful. He was saying, no, these are natural parts of who we are. We shouldn't be ashamed of them. We should understand them, embrace them, and use them to our advantage.
It's almost like he's taking the devil's advocate position, challenging us to question our assumptions and redefine what it means to be good, bad, right, wrong.
And that's what makes the Satanic Bible such a fascinating and challenging read. It's not a book of easy answers. It's a book of questions, a book that forces you to think critically and to confront your own beliefs.
So far, this has been an incredible journey. Through the Satanic Bible, we've explored LaVey's philosophy, delved into the intricacies of satanic magic, and even learned how to protect ourselves from psychic vampires.
It's been a deep dive indeed.
But there's still one crucial piece of the puzzle that I want to address, the misconceptions surrounding Satanism. I think it's time to separate fact from fiction and clarify what this philosophy is really all about.
Yeah, it's amazing how much misinformation is out there.
Right, you mentioned Satanism, and people immediately conjure up images of devil worship, blood sacrifices, all that dark and sinister stuff. But what we've been exploring here is something completely different.
It's a philosophy that's been demonized and sensationalized for far too long. And I think that's largely because it challenges the status quo. It questions those deeply ingrained beliefs about good and evil, about the nature of authority.
You know, as we've been talking, I keep thinking about a passage in the Satanic Bible that really struck me. It's where LaVey directly addresses those stereotypes about Satanism. He writes, "He is not the perverted fiend who is just waiting for the opportunity to deflower every young virgin, nor is he the skulking degenerate who furtively hangs around in the dirty bookstores, slavering over the nasty pictures."
It's almost as if he anticipated the public's reaction to his work, how it would be twisted and misrepresented.
Right. And then he goes on to say, if pornography fills his needs for the moment, He unashamedly buys some choice items and guiltlessly peruses them at his leisure.
It's about honesty and self-awareness. As we've discussed, there's no shame in embracing your desires as long as you're not harming anyone.
It's about owning your choices, not letting society dictate how you should feel or what you should desire, which I have to admit is pretty refreshing in a world that's constantly trying to tell you what to think, what to buy, how to live your life.
It is, and I think that's what makes LaVey's message so appealing to some people. It's a rejection of that societal pressure, a declaration of individual sovereignty.
If we strip away all this sensationalism, all the misconceptions, what's the core message of the Satanic Bible? What's the takeaway for our listener who's been patiently following this deep dive?
I think it boils down to a few key principles. First, there's the rejection of hypocrisy and the embrace of radical honesty, both with yourself and with the world.
No more pretending to be something you're not, no more denying your true desires.
Exactly. Then there's the emphasis on personal responsibility. You are the master of your own fate, the architect of your own reality. No gods, no devils, no external authority to blame or to praise.
It's empowering, but also a bit daunting. I mean, if you're truly responsible for everything that happens in your life, that's a lot of pressure.
It is, but it's also incredibly liberating. Because if you're the one in control, then you have the power to change things, to create the life you want.
And that leads us to the third key principle, the pursuit of earthly pleasures. Not in a hedonistic, self-destructive way, but in a way that celebrates life, embraces the senses, and allows you to experience the world to the fullest.
It's a philosophy that's grounded in the here and now, not in some abstract afterlife, or a set of arbitrary rules dictated by a higher power.
It's about taking ownership of your desires, understanding them, and finding a healthy way to express them.
Precisely. And that, I believe, is the essence of Satanism, as LaVey envisioned it.
It's certainly a different perspective on spirituality, one that challenges us to question everything we thought we knew about good and evil, right and wrong. It's not for everyone, but it's definitely worth exploring, even if it's just to expand your understanding of the world and of yourself.
And perhaps even to discover a bit of that personal power that LaVey so passionately advocated for.
Well said. I think that's a perfect place to wrap up our deep dive into the Satanic Bible. It's been a wild ride, full of twists and turns, but ultimately I think we've emerged of a deeper understanding of this often misunderstood philosophy.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought and perhaps even inspired you to question your own assumptions about the world. If you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to pick up a copy of the Satanic Bible and see what insights you can glean from it.
Just remember to approach it with an open mind and a critical eye.
That's key with any text, especially one as provocative as this. And on that note, we'll leave you with a final thought to ponder. In a world that's increasingly obsessed with external validation and conformity, could there be value in reclaiming your own power and defining your own truth, even if it deviates from the norm?
That's a question worth pondering indeed.
And with that, we'll bid you farewell. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.